that we're still technically just beginning. Isn't that a weird thought? Jim has himself commented on this, but I was going to comment on that regardless of seeing his little thing in the Lurker's Guide. This is... Most people, myself included, tend to consider Season 4 the meat, the real core of what Babylon 5 is, and you know, most of my favorite episodes and favorite sequences and favorite stuff is all in Season 4. And I just point that out because this has been such an amazing ride already, that we are already at the point now where we have discussed so much and done so much and engaged in so much. I mentioned last episode the reality of truth and, you know, the question of whether truth exists or not. I brought that up with regards to this episode because one of the things that was mentioned was the whole, you know, you need to drop your mask. You need to see who you really are in order to figure this out. There are a couple of moments in this episode where people drop their masks and just are themselves. The most noticeable is, of course, when Justin and Anna both drop their masks and stop pretending. Most telling, and most horrific, really, in my opinion, is when Anna says, you know, I am not the original Anna, but I could love you just the same as she did. But the most interesting one to me is Sheridan. We've seen a lot of Sheridan over the last couple of years, and I've been pointing out, bit by bit, aspects of his character as we go, and I keep re-emphasizing it because I want it to be in your mind when you're going through this series, and especially when you get to an episode like this, where all of a sudden, all that Sheridan is laid bare. His mask is dropped in this episode, and it's not dropped because he's asleep. It's dropped because Anna shows up, and he knows almost immediately that that's not her. This is a presumption on my part, I want to add that, but everything I've seen seems to indicate to me that he knew very early on that she was not Anna. Not in the sense that mattered to him. And ergo, he was setting up this whole thing and playing this whole way specifically because he wanted to be able to do something about the future he saw. Which is very, very Sheridan, by the way. Not just stopping the Shadow War, but trying to save the Centauri. I remind you, as of his point in time, from his perspective, the Centauri are the frickin' bad guys. You remember I mentioned that? And yet he was still willing to do that. That is Sheridan. The real Sheridan. The man who is willing to die to save an enemy. He also has a quote about how this is more than about what I want. That's the kind of thing that Sheridan has wrestled with for some time. The way he interacts with Anna, the way he talks with her. He allows himself to be angry and hurt and confused and lost. He even confronts Delenn about the fact that she's been hiding stuff from him. If you've been paying attention, he's been noticing when she doesn't tell him everything. And I've been pointing it out as well as we go through this, because that was building to this point, when that turns back and hurts her. Her not revealing the whole truth has finally led to the reality that he now isn't sure if he can trust her, and the division that is now between the two of them. And of course, you know, the insistence on both sides that they do actually love each other, despite or indeed because of everything. For those of you not aware, Anna was played by Bruce Boxleitner's actual wife at the time. She was an actress as well, so this wasn't a big deal. And I actually think she did a really good job of it. She portrays basically 3 different shadings of the same personality throughout this. And she does a good job of all of them. The only thing I thought was just kind of head-tilting was her scream right at the end, which I felt shouldn't have been in at all, if I'm being honest. She should have just looked up and then... Just my opinion. That's the only nitpick I would have at all. Before we go any further, I have a question for you guys, as I like to ask. Is it Anna? Now, I know that sounds weird, because the episode itself flat out says, you know, I'm not the original Anna, and, you know, they flat out say, you don't come out of those ships quite the same. But, again, there's enough evidence there that this is at least an Anna. I know that sounds weird, but same memory, same perspective. The only thing that's different about her is that she's doing what she's told. She's following orders. So I wanted to ask you your opinion. Do you think this is Anna? Because this kind of cuts back to that theme I just mentioned, the reality of truth. What is truth here? Is she Anna? Is she really Anna? By what do we define the real Anna? Now, if I'm being 100% honest, I anticipate I'll get like 50 or so comments. That's over. I never get that many. I'll get like 3 comments of people saying, no, it's not Anna, because ... But that's the point I'm actually trying to bring up here, the ... How do we define things is how we define truth, which is tying into that theme I mentioned earlier, and is also tying into what they say with regards to both the Shadows and the Vorlons in this episode. But I'm getting a little bit ahead of myself. Let me rewind a little bit. It is interesting because one of the biggest reasons that Sheridan is so upset at Delenn is not necessarily that she hid stuff from him. He does understand that concept. He's a commander. He hides a lot of things from a lot of people in this episode. But what is important to him, the thing that really sets him off, is being denied the right to choose. Again, very in keeping with Sheridan's character arc. Why did he go against Earth Force? Why did he go against Earthdome, I should say? Why did he push against the Clark regime? Why did he try to band together the non-aligned worlds? Why did he stand with the Narn? Because he was given the right to choose in those situations, and he was in opposition to the right to choose being taken away from him. Very big on that freedom of will concept, Sheridan is. And he demonstrates this constantly throughout the series up till this point. I find myself wondering, actually, if he would ever be a suitable elite, as I mentioned last time. Because he kind of isn't when you think about it, because he wants the right to choose for himself. Also note that he firmly rejects Anna, probably at least in part because of the fact that she was deprived of the right to choose for herself. Or, if we want to be more accurate, she did choose for herself, and then the right was deprived from her based on her choice. I have an uneaten carrot right here, and I left it here just because I wanted to do the visual thing, because this is kind of what the Shadows do in this episode. This is the first time we've seen the Shadows, to us, present the carrot aspect of things. But we've seen them do this to Londo and the Centauri before, and we've seen them do this to the other non-aligned worlds before. We just haven't seen it personally. I mention this because too often people seem to think that the Shadows represent chaos, whereas the Vorlons represent order. And while that is, in an overall surface level, true, both sides do the same thing, really. Both sides manipulate the lesser races, gotta put the quote in quotes there, the lesser races thanks to carrot and stick. You do what we want, you don't. It's very simple, actually. And I'm not saying that to deride it. It's just, it's true across all of their machinations. Both sides do this. There's a reason I've argued for so many years that Kosh is not actually a typical Vorlon. Because I think Kosh was actually a decent person. Even though he does have a bit of a Vorlon mentality, I think Ulkesh is a far more typical Vorlon. This is, of course, just my opinion, and we don't know for certain. But seeing the Shadows directly dangle this carrot right in front of him is interesting. And it shows how much importance they place on Sheridan personally. And they even explain why. You know, you have managed to unite all these people. That's an astonishing feat. And it is, and I've already discussed why. We don't want to make a martyr out of you, because we've done that before. We know what happens when we make a martyr out of someone. Someone like Sheridan is kind of the perfect person to be a martyr, actually. He is loud, he's obvious. Everyone knows who Sheridan is. Everyone at Earth and the non-aligned worlds and the Centauri and the Narn, and everyone know Sheridan, the head of Babylon 5. He is the main character, the pinnacle guy. And the thing I find most interesting is that makes his counterparts so much more interesting, even though we only ever see him here. But that's the point! That is exactly the point. Justin is actually the other hand. I kind of deliberately said a slightly misleading sentence, or 2 or 3, last episode, where I talked about Mr. Morden being the other hand. But no, it's Justin. It's Justin. I can tell you that even if I hadn't read the Lurker Guide where JMS flat out confirms, yeah, it's Justin. Because it makes so much sense. It's a yin and yang thing. Sheridan is, ha! Nobody knows who the hell Justin is. And again, that's true in character and out. We've seen Sheridan since Season 2. I mean, if this was Sinclair, we would have seen him since the beginning, basically. Although I'm not sure how those timelines would have gone exactly. But whatever. The point being, main character, right? We know exactly who he is. And everyone can, like, again, in character and out, we can all swear by them. This Justin guy's here for one episode. For one sequence of scenes. But basically one overall scene in one episode. The explanation he gives is perfect. Why is it 9 to 5 and not 11 to 4? Who decides that the skirt line's going to be here or not? And Sheridan's answer, I don't know, is perfect, because that is actually how that works. I've actually talked about this extensively. I don't want to get into a political discussion, but we have a tendency to go, that guy, or that girl, or even that group. But there's an army of bureaucracy that actually makes those things happen. And in many cases, tends to make the real decisions of things that actually affect day-to-day life. Justin's a nobody. Okay, I don't have the cloak on. Justin's a nobody. He doesn't matter to anybody. Nobody knows his name. He's the quiet, unassuming kind of guy who nobody actually recognizes or is aware of, and nevertheless has a massive impact on everything in invisible ways. It's a great way to yin and yang the two characters. And, of course, you'd think kind of showcases the difference between the Shadow and the Vorlon philosophy. You know, the Shadow versus the Vorlons, but isn't that the exact opposite of their stated philosophy? Think about that for a moment. So Justin is a perfect true opposite, true yang, or whichever it is, to Sheridan's yin. And I love that. And I love the emphasis they put on him because they understand the value of such a person. They're not there for B5. You notice that, right? They could have destroyed Babylon 5. It was still a nexus that was a threat to their operations. They could have destroyed it easily and probably without much effort. But they don't. Why? Two reasons, I think. Number one, obviously, they don't consider Babylon 5 relevant. For whatever purpose, they consider Sheridan relevant. Not his support network, not his infrastructure. Even though they were threatening to destroy B5, that was still just a threat to be leveled at Sheridan, the actual focus. But I think there's another reason for that, and I think a much more important reason for that. I think the Shadows are scared. I've been pointing out time and time again, and I know it's technically actually revealed in the next episode, the first episode of Season 4. So forgive me for jumping in just a little bit, but I've been tired of not talking about this. The Shadows are nowhere near as strong as they portray themselves as. I mean, they're strong, certainly, but they have constantly, consistently, time and time again, been retreating or watching their own or not sticking their neck out too far. And as of the next episode after this, it is 100% confirmed what happens in this episode as another aspect of. In other words, that desire to keep themselves safe, that fact that they are not as well structured, as well defended as they could be. I think they fled from B5 because they just suffered a massive loss and they didn't want to lose any more ships. They didn't want to risk it. What else do they have? Keeping in mind there were a couple of fusion bombs left on B5, so the odds of them losing some ships was at least possible, especially if reinforcements arrived or the planet was able to intervene, you know? So from their perspective, not having 100% intelligence on the situation, leaving was the best choice in terms of the victory being defined as most Shadow vessels survived. I actually have wondered more than once if the Shadows lack the ability to produce new ships. I know that's a weird thing to say, but I've considered that in my theory crafting many times, and it would explain a lot about the Shadows and how they function. It's not that alien of an idea, actually. There are several fictional works where people are so advanced and so old that they literally have lost the technology that they use on a daily basis. And it's not that hard of a concept for a normal, ordinary human being to understand. For example, you know how to drive a car, right? In fact, you probably know how to drive a car quite well. Can you build one? You, specifically. Now, I know societies don't quite work like that, but imagine that perspective being taken to a furthest extreme. Everyone involved in society knowing how to run cars, how to maintain them and upkeep them, but not how to build them. It's an interesting idea. Note how this episode treats you very intelligently, by the way, and I love it. They do explain things, but there's a lot of little details that are just left on the screen for you to pick up on it. For example, when Franklin sees the scans, it just has the name Carol Sanders or whatever it is, Bester's lover. And there's no dialogue in that scene. They don't call it out. It's just, and we're to understand based on how it goes what's happening. They don't need to tell us that. The the gun and the second gun. You were paying attention, right? When he gets a gun, hides it away, and then gets a second gun. That's another little detail. The weather report thing. Franklin having the cane. There's a bunch of little stuff. I only wrote down those few. There's a bunch of little things that are little bits of adding flavor to the scenes, adding continuity to the scenes, and treating the viewer like they have a brain rather than like they're an idiot. Too often fiction will say, I'm going to put this second gun here in case I need it later and I'm disarmed. Hordy, hordy, hor. You know, I mean... I like G'Kar's continued role as the League's unofficial leader. He's the one who got the fusion bombs, after all. I like how Londo was promoted. It'll not only set up a lot of Season 4. We haven't even met Cartagia yet. That's such a weird thought. But it's also interesting to do... It's the messed up nature of Centauri politics. The more close to home and up front you are, the more you are tied down. But more to the point... I like the fact that Londo, who, as I've described before, is the good politician, I don't mean morally good, I mean he's good at it, can pick up on stuff like the fact that this is actually a punishment, that he is having a leash put around his neck. And then they get the warning about leaving the station. I just ask a question of you guys. Do you think they did? Obviously they didn't warn the station personnel, but do you think he and Veer left and fled? Food for thought. Garibaldi shows some trust in Sheridan. We'll get to that in Season 4. One of the arguments that Justin gives to... Justin and Morden and Anna all give to Sheridan is about the necessity of these horrible violent acts towards evolution. I want to point out really quick that that is a presumption, not a fact. I do that because it's kind of keeping in time with the theme that's been going on throughout this whole episode, the reality of truths. I've already talked about that. The Shadows are positing the fact that it is truth that these horrible things need to happen. Travesties and atrocities and wars and death, because that way the species will grow stronger, presuming that they will grow stronger, and anytime they don't grow stronger, they literally just shrug it off. I can't remember his exact reaction, but Justin's reaction to being told that, yes, sometimes species are wiped out. I mean, you know, it happens. Unfortunately, you know, sometimes. It seems so obvious that, well, I'm just going to lay it out there. I don't think the Shadows, ironically, know what they want. And I don't think they know who they are. And I say that because I also think the same of the Vorlons. I think that both races have been doing this little back and forth dance for so long that they do not know the answers to their own core questions. They don't know what they want and they don't know who they are. I wish I had more to say about that, but honestly the sentence speaks for itself so much. And the realization of it just hit me like a ton of bricks. And then I'm going to feel like an idiot because in the Lurker's Guide, which you all insist I keep reading, the exact same thing is said by a fan in that. Now I'm like, oh, god damn it. I thought I had this great original thought about the series, and it turns out everyone else has already had the same thought. Whatever. It's still true. I like the fact that other people have picked up on the same thing. And JMS himself said, yeah, that was done deliberately. So woo for being right. But then, of course... And this is shown in the way Justin... Pay attention to the way they try to argue Sheridan down. They constantly contradict themselves, but they don't do so immediately. JMS is actually good at this type of writing. He's done this before, notably with the Night Watch and the way they convince people of things. And so their comments and their arguments don't add up at all. It all leads to one inevitable conclusion. The truth of the situation is that the Shadows do find Sheridan to be a genuine threat. Not just because of his group with the Worlds, I think, but because of his connection to the Vorlons. You can't tell me they don't know that Sheridan is the reason why the Vorlons started to act. And that's got to be the kind of thing that terrifies the Shadows. And they've been dealing some genuine victories against the Shadows, which, as I've mentioned before, is something the Shadows fear due to their smaller numbers. And considering what Sheridan pulls off in this episode, I think they were right to be afraid of him. So convincing him is in their best interest. But they are willing to convince him by any means. You noticed that, right? It's just they tried to convince him through words first because that's easiest. But they didn't need to convince him through words, as they didn't need to convince Anna through words. You do what you're told. Morden will actually mimic that same quote, I think, next episode, but it's sometime in the near future. Flesh does what it's told. I love the shot of the Shadow City, by the way. It's brilliant. JMS himself has actually lamented it because he believes it wasn't as alien as he would like it to look, but it still got across the idea of massive Shadow City quite well. I thought it was well done. And I also like how Sheridan, not even for a moment, considered taking their deal. Ignoring the fact that he went in foreknowledged. He knew about Anna's implants, and he knew that that wasn't Anna from his own judgment. His right to choose. He looked at that and said, nah, there's no way. And not even for a second did he actually consider it. And yet he basically plays along with the hope of pulling this situation into a situation that he can use and still live through it. It is not until it becomes apparent that he is going to die that he then orders the suicide run. Because at that moment, averting that future is worth his life. And is, it's about more than what I want. And then Kosh is like, yo, jump, dude! Sheridan's like, huh? Oh, yeah, okay. So where the hell's Garibaldi? Shekar's speech at the end is brilliant. The music choice is perfect. The visuals are perfect. There's a shot of Babylon 5 slowly falling behind the terminus of the planet and going into shadow and then slowly turning on its own lights. Just think about that sentence for a minute. It's brilliant visual representation, brilliant visual symbology. And I love it. And the moment it happens during the speech is, of course, perfect. I only wrote down a couple of tidbits of it. His speech is quite long, and it's fantastic. You'll just have to hear it for yourself. But the idea that we fight against chaos and despair is something I really enjoy the concept of. The idea that worse than the death of flesh is the death of hope, and that the future, both in revelation and transition, is always born in pain. All three of those major tenets of the speech really resonated with me personally, because I kind of agree. It hurts to move forward. I actually talked about that just last episode. And the death of hope is by far one of the worst things that can happen to a person. Way worse than death, my opinion. And I don't mean like, I was hoping to get this new job, but it's got... No, I mean the death of hope. You have no hope. No possibility of things ever getting better in your life in any way. The truest description of the word despair is a really, really, really horrible thing to have to endure. I didn't expect that to hit me that hard. And, of course, the idea that we are fighting not against principalities and powers, which is kind of a biblical quote in its own right, but the idea of fighting against chaos and despair is another thing I find interesting because it posits the idea that all of us, whether we are politically united or familially united or friendly united or in any way united whatsoever, we do still have this one common element amongst us as living sentient, sapient beings, and that is that we fight against chaos and despair. The idea that we do not wish to devolve into madness or insanity or destruction or lack of sentience and sapience. And the fact that we do not want to fall into that pit, that death of hope, which would be an absolute annihilation of who and what we are. It's very powerful and very moving, and I loved it. And can you freaking believe that we've still got the meat of Babylon 5 ahead of us? I remember when this episode came out on TV. Forgive me for the segue here. I'm kind of done with my notes, though. And I remember seeing this episode and just being like, oh! Hit me like a ton of bricks. And keeping in mind, they've already killed off a main character. Technically twice. Technically 3 times. But you get my point. They're not afraid to get rid of main characters, which at the time was an alien thought to me. I imagine younger viewers nowadays look at that and like, well, duh, because it happens much more regularly nowadays in television. But back in the day, knocking off a main character, let alone the main character, was so unusual. And not even for a second did I question that they could and would actually do this with Sheridan. I was presuming Ivanova and Delenn and the others were going to take up the stand and kind of become the new main characters of the show at this point on. And I was talking with all my friends about it. Oh my god, this and that. I can't believe it. It was great. I'm curious what you guys thought when this one came out. But for now, wow, that is a really short video. I'm so sorry, guys. I have so little to say. The episode speaks for itself so much. See you next time, guys.